So we're live. Hey, we got to the end of the Decalogue. It's called the Decalogue, the Ten Commandments, because there's 10 of them. Deca, Logeue, the word. Uh, when I refer to them, I usually just refer to them as the 10. We don't even find that they're enumerated that way until Deuteronomy lists them as the 10 Commandments. The way that they're structured in Exodus and in anywhere that you find them, they're not numbered when before. In fact, you have to split the Hebrew up into pieces to get the sentences to get the 10 actually. So we find those things based on the structure. You shall not, you shall not, you shall, and all of these different uh, the structure of those sentences say that these are things that you are to do always. Apodectic is the term. So there's some things in Scripture that we read and we know that they're not written in a way that says you do these always for all time. And we find that when we get into these laws about dietary laws, uh, the reasons for stoning people, even the structure that they're presented allows us to understand that these aren't things that are going to remain forever, but there are some things that do remain forever, and the 10 absolutely do that. So we're going to look at some of that and learn a little bit more about how to pull those things apart and understand them better. So God has spoken out loud to Moses these 10 commandments. All right. Everything it says that in verse 18, all the people witnessed the thunder and lightning and the sound of the ram's horn and the mountain surrounded by smoke. When they saw it, they trembled and they stood at a distance. And he said, You speak to us and we will listen, they said to Moses, but don't let God speak to us or we'll die. So they understood that God was speaking to Moses. And for some reason, God had chosen Moses not to die. And they were recognizing that and saying, please, you listen on our behalf. And but we know that if God speaks to us, we're going to die. Nowhere does God say that. But we do find in this that two things are unfolded here. There are some things that we must do as God's people, and that we need a mediator in order to understand and do them. So that's clear here. We also find that same principle of God at work with Jesus. There are things about our life that we must do with our life. And there's no way that we're going to do them on our own or to understand even what a life with God is about without a mediator to show us and to speak for us and to speak to us. That becomes Jesus. He's the Messiah. He's the one that brings the good news and shares it with us and then shows us how to live in it and ultimately expresses the fullness of the good news through his death and resurrection. He offers that to us as the mediator between us and God and then sends us to be the same so that we live as little Christ in the world, live in the image of Christ, doing the very same things that he did for a lost world, we do for a lost world. And all of this has been established in history even before this, but it becomes a codified reality now. There's some things that we know that God wants from us, and we know there's some things that God doesn't want of us. And we find in this that to break the 10 is to, in essence, you're stealing something. There's a, and the theft of anything is an injustice. Uh, we find that not stated succinctly in the garden, but what was taken from man in the garden uh, was stolen as a result of our rebellion. Life was taken away, and ever since that time, God has been working to establish the life that He desires for mankind. So we get to the Noah story, And Noah, found favor with God. That's the man that he's going to carry on his plan with. Everybody else is wiped out. And we find that Noah becomes a sort of mediator in things. And Abraham especially, the promise is made to Abraham. Your people are going to be a nation of priests. God's reminded them of this already before we get to this scene at Mount Sinai, that you've been called and chosen by me, although you're the least of all the people. I've chosen you to be a nation of priests. So we're being introduced to this whole priesthood idea, and it becomes succinct in what Moses' role is, and Aaron's too. But we'll see in a little bit, Aaron winds up kind of surrendering his role when he becomes involved in the golden calf incident. Excuse me, I don't want to miss something from the hospital. Okay. So he says, don't let God speak to us or we'll die. Moses responded to the people, don't be afraid, for God has come to test you. So we're back with that theme of testing. Ever since they left Egypt, God has been testing. Testing, 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 testing. Why is that? Remember why? Making sure they're ready. Not just to be free, but to be with Him. Freedom is a wonderful thing, but it's not the end all. Freedom is meant to establish for us a life with God. We that's why freedom guaranteed by the Constitution and freedom that's guaranteed by God are two different things. Freedom of America guarantees what? The pursuit of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's what that gets for you. That's what the preamble of the Constitution says. That's its purpose. Freedom from sin gets us what? A life with God. Okay. So we never want to compare the two, and we make that mistake sometimes. What we are pursuing in our freedom has a much higher goal, has a much higher reality for us than just simply life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Why we get life in the pursuit of God.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So anyway, so Moses says he's come to test you so that you will fear him and will not sin. So he says, don't be afraid, do not fear. But he says he's coming to test you so that you will fear. So two different words here that get translated into the English with the root word fear. Okay. So one fear, do not be afraid, addresses this idea of trembling fear. And when I think of this word fear, I don't know why I do this, and you can laugh at me when you do. Let's see, two types of fear: a tormenting fear. For some reason, I always think of the cowardly lion in front of the Wizard of Oz. I don't know why that comes into my mind almost every time when I think of this kind of fear, because he's supposed to be all tough and fearless, and he winds up being so fearful. So
Tremble with fear.
yeah, yeah. So the first is don't have this tormenting fear where your life is coming apart, okay, because you're so afraid. It says, but God is testing you so that you will fear Him, and the fear of the Lord is that kind of fear that keeps us from sinning, okay, and it's at the heart of everything that the Old Testament wisdom books say about fear. Our thing is that God is um, what the way Dr. Kaiser describes it as salutary fear, which promotes and demonstrates the presence of an attitude of complete trust and belief in God. So the word comes together for us as saying, I trust Him and I believe in Him. So sin is not a thing I pursue in my life because I do know that God hates sin and that He deals with it harshly. So my goal My level of fear comes into this place of being completely trusting and believing in God. Now that seems kind of odd. You're going to fear what you trust, but it's just the way that the word comes about in the English. I think the English fails us in this. And so often the translations fail us, but there's some words that get translated early and they never leave. They never leave the English translations. And this is one of those things. Plus, it's hard to say. It's hard to come up with one word that says what we're trying to describe. But we stay with reverence or fear or awesome wonder is another way that's described sometime. Um, but wonder kind of conveys the wrong idea too because we know precisely what's going on here. I'm going to trust God and I'm going to believe in Him, and therefore I'm not going to pursue a life of sin because I know God hates sin. So it's a reverence of God, but it's also expressing the relationship that we have with Him. Does that make
I,
sense?
I just want to say there was a time back about 25 years ago, and I mean, I've been going to church forever and I've been a Christian forever and everything, but just due to life and everything, I was at this crossroads where there was, and I don't remember exactly, but there was something that I could do. And I was sitting there mulling it over, and I was kind of like, well, that kind of goes against my beliefs. And I wish I could remember what it was, but I was sitting there, and it was like where I decided I'm going to do it. And it was the craziest thing because at that moment, I felt so afraid. And the way that I can think of it is it's almost like God removed himself from me. And when he did, and I felt it, and I mean, it just, I mean, when I tell you I felt terror, I mean, I was just like visibly moved and everything. And I got down on my knees. And I'm like, I
I,
don't even know what I'm thinking. Please, please help me, Lord. I felt it. I don't want to feel that no more. Help me.
yeah. I think that's a very real experience for a lot of people.
Yeah. Because you make that decision sometimes not realizing that God will not go with you if you're going to do this. He's
Yeah.
not going there.
He's not
So if
going
you
there.
go, you go alone. When you feel, and
Woe the
I felt this
destruction of
terror
aloneness.
over me,
Yeah.
and the only thing I think, is like God removed himself. Don't know why. Maybe he did it teach me a lesson, or say, "Oh, you really want me to go? Let me show you what it's like." But I mean, it was just like, and God, okay, stop. I mean, God, and I prayed 45 minutes. Right? Please help me. Please help me. Sorry.
Yeah.
But, and all was just that feeling. It was just, I mean, it was this feeling of just complete desolation. It was like everything that I knew.
Yeah. Verse 21. And the people remained standing at a distance as Moses approached the total darkness where God was. So here we have this definition of fear that we're coming upon here. Moses says he's done this to test you so that you will fear him. And Moses is walking into the dark by himself in fear, in the fear that we've just talked about. He believes and he trusts and he knows that he's not going near to God with sin on his heart. He's made up his mind what kind of person he's going to be before God, and God is accepting him. That's important. Um, so there's more laws. The first has to do with worship. You would think that there'd be a much broader set of laws here, but this has to do with places of worship, how they were going to gather, what was going to mark the place of worship. So we're going to find in a little bit that God settles on a tabernacle that is going to be his tent that they're going to set up, and that's where they're going to meet God as they move through the desert. Okay? All this comes as a result of other things that we'll get into later.
Mobile.
Yeah, that's right. And when God said move the tent, that's when the people moved. But anyway, we'll get to that. But it says here in 22, then the Lord told Moses, This is what you are to say to the Israelites. You have seen that I have spoken to you from heaven. Do not make gods of silver to rival me. Do not make gods of gold for yourself. Okay? So he's saying, I'm spoke from you from heaven. Did you see me? No. You heard me. Do you know what I look like? Do you know my shape? Do you know my form? Do you know how I move? So he's saying, don't try to make anything out of silver and gold that may resemble me. There's no way you're going to be able to do that. You'll find that you will put your faith and trust in the silver and gold and not in me. He goes on, make an earthen altar for me and sacrifice on it your burnt offerings and fellowship offerings, your flocks and your herds. I will come to you and bless you in every place where I cause my name to be remembered. If you make a stone altar for me, do not build it out of cut stones. If you use your chisel on it, you will defile it. Do not go up to where to my altar on steps, so that your nakedness is not exposed on it. Okay, so that's obvious. I think what he's talking about. If you make an altar so high, that somebody can look up your skirt, then he doesn't want that to happen. So what is the significance here of? Well, I think we can understand the gold part of this pretty clearly. But what about the stones? The earth, just make it out of earthen stones. Why is what is that? Why is that important to God? Might you imagine?
Or you come out, make a decorative altar.
Yeah, no decoration, just simple. God wants simple.
Would that be something like graven image?
Yes. How often do we do things that we worship the object instead of God? Who's going to want to worship a pile of stones? That's his point. You might come to worship something made of silver and gold. You might come to worship something that's elaborately made. When does this happen? When the temple's built. The temple becomes the end all for Judaism, even up until the time of Jesus. Because the temple became the object. That's why Jesus has said, you tear this down, I'll build it back in 3 days. What an insult it was to them, see? Because the temple had become the glory of God. And God is saying here, no, you offer what you're offering to me on a pile of stones.
Plus,
That way you'll never forget who you're offering it to.
plus the temple had become governed by the leaders.
Oh, yeah, in Jesus' day. Absolutely.
It had to do with God.
That was the whole problem with the money changers and the Gentile court and all those things. Yeah. So God is saying, he's saying here, simple is what I want so that you won't take your eyes off of me. It says something about us. We're so easily distracted from the glory of God. Yeah. And the glory of God here, he says you're making what? Burnt offerings and fellowship offerings. Okay? The glory of God is this. I will take a substitute. I will take a substitute on my altar so that we may have fellowship together. I'm not asking for your blood. I'm not asking for the blood of your sons like I did in Egypt. I'll take a substitute. Yeah.
No flaw.
Yeah. That's right. And we can have fellowship when that happens. We can be together. So anything that might risk that relationship and anything that might take our eyes off the fact that God is allowing for the life that is in the blood of that animal to be a substitutionary offering for their own life, okay, then we begin to get it all connected in a way. Makes sense? We find the completeness of that on the cross. But that's so many hundreds of years later. That this is just the beginning of teaching this lesson. You don't think God moves at a glacier speed. I mean, really, it takes him a long time to get this stuff drilled into our hard heads so that we can begin to see the fullness of what he's done in Christ Jesus. And and why does he still wait? Because there's so many people that gotta have it. That's my opinion. He doesn't want to lose anybody. So he calls us to share
And that's the
really the
part
beauty
of
of this.
part of it is that even like whenever we start to participate in church or services or whatever, and if we take it too far and take it to heart, then we stop worshiping God and going, "Look what I have
Yeah.
done. Great, look at what I'm doing,"
Yeah.
and we immediately take it away from God, and start going, "This is me. This is me."
Yeah.
It's,
It's easy. It's easy
yeah,
to do. Or we reach a point of not trusting and we don't even have a belief in ourselves. We find that if we start out trusting God and then we don't trust him, we've already seen the errors of our ways. So we either just completely give up or search for something else that's going to provide meaning. I believe that's what happened with the golden calf incident. Moses was gone. Their mediator was not present, was not visible. They decided they would go another way because they really had they didn't even have any faith in their own understanding. They had to lean on something. And we all do that. We lean on something.
plus I
And
feel that Jesus and he is interceded for us, whereas with them there was no one that
right.
interceded for them.
Well, no, they
They were
had later on they had the temple and they believed that if they just did what the law said about worship, then everything was going to be okay with them. That's why they started living such sinful lives was because hey, we're God's chosen people and we got the temple.
like the
So
party.
and Christians do the same thing.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm saved. I don't have to worry about it. I do what I want. And not understanding, you know, anything that they're talking about at that point. Because that's not anything that's not in any way what the cross is. It's not a license to sin, you know. All right. So there's some laws here. He sets forth these worship laws about offering sacrifice and the relationship there, the fellowship offering and others. Now, the first thing he talks about after that is the laws about slaves. Isn't that interesting? Because they were once slaves. This is something they should really understand. And one of the easiest ways to act unjustly in the world is to mistreat someone that's already either voluntarily or otherwise you're inferior. And so he warns about that. So when you buy a Hebrew slave, he is to serve for 6 years. Then in the seventh year, he is to leave as a free man without paying anything. So what's he talking about? The year of Jubilee, which we won't talk about in Exodus. It's established in other law books. But if you buy a Hebrew slave, and usually the slave freely sold themselves, okay, um, so that the money that you pay for the slave probably went to the slave's family, but he willingly do it. He did it because the family may have needed the money. So God says you can only keep him for 6 years, no matter what you pay for him. He doesn't have to pay for his freedom. 6 years, you just set him free. Okay. The Code of Hammurabi, which was a, a law code written by other nations at this time, allowed for only 3 years of ownership. So what God does here is he gives actually the slave owner a longer period of time. But then there were other complications in Hammurabi's law because there was a payment that was owed at the end of the 3 years, where there's none. So a little different, but working along roughly the same lines. It says if he arrives alone, he is to leave alone, meaning that doesn't come with a family. He leaves alone. If he arrives with a wife, his wife is to leave with him. If his master gives him a wife and she bears him sons or daughters, the wife and her children belong to her master, and the man must leave. And the man must leave alone. Interesting. If the wife has no children, she can go. But if she proves to be fertile and is able to bear sons and daughters, then at the end of the 6 years, She and the children stay with the master, and the man's free.
Man, can we bring that back to today's?
So so help me kind of work through what's going on here.
Well, I mean, it sounds to me like the kid must have been the sired from the master.
Well,
It was his
oh, I'm sorry
kids.
about that.
It
Um,
was his kids, or some of them were his kids.
no, it doesn't say that.
No.
That would make it a lot easier to understand.
Yeah.
Okay. Um, so everything that the slave produced during the time that he was under the master's care belonged to the master. All right. So this, in effect, the children and the wives resemble property at this point. That everything that he had produced under the while he was owned by his master, which included children, okay, they now belong to the master. So that's kind of the way that comes about there. And then of course the mother stays with the children. It's not that the wife is taken from the husband. It's more that the mother stays with the children.
Is any of it incentive for the man to stay?
Uh, could be. Would you stay? I would stay. If it was my wife and children, I would stay. But it does give it's interesting in the fact that is he allowed to stay? The
Yeah,
law
well,
says that he's set
yeah.
free,
Yeah.
you know.
So it may not be his choice to leave
Yeah.
so he can get out.
Yeah. What it does illustrate for us again is that under the will of God, there's some hard choices to make. It's not just pretty. It's just not that everybody gets what they want because God's there. There's some things that happen in life that create particular circumstances, like this man needing to sell himself into slavery. Okay. And that particular circumstance is now producing hard choices. But God's given his blessing to it. So this is the way it needs to be. Still tough. Um, Now it doesn't say that if he arrives with a wife and they bear children that
Yeah,
they
that's
stay.
different. The master
This is
gives
when the
them a wife.
master gives him a wife.
Oh,
Okay. So it's almost a partnership that's going on there. Yeah. Yeah. So really if the wife has children, is she ever really his wife? She's the mother of his children. You begin to kind of see the difference in a situation like this. Yeah.
it's almost like he gets a wife as the way the farmer would give somebody a tractor or an axe or something
Yeah.
like that. She's a tool of his, and you give it back when you through working.
Now here's the but after all of that. But if the slave declares, I love my master, my wife, and my children, I do not want to leave as a free man. His master is to bring him to the judges, and then bring him to the door or doorpost. His master will pierce his ear with an awl, and he will serve his master for life. All right.
At least you got a cool earring anyway.
Oh, this is so cool.
But you got your family and you taken care of.
That's right. So you keep your family, and the price for that is that you're forever indentured to your master. But has that been a bad thing? Everything seems to be pretty good. He's gotten a wife, he's gotten children. Okay. He's like Bert points out, he's obviously been taken care of if he's been allowed a wife. So yeah. So all of this kind of comes together where we see not only that there's rules that apply, but when it says here, love, when that begins to come into play, um, God is willing to allow us to pay a price for that love. You got to remember that because that becomes important. That's an important concept to God for a long time. You pay the price for your love, for those that you love. All right. When a man sells his daughter as a concubine, this is a hard one. She is not to leave as the male slaves do. If she is displeasing to her master, who chose her for himself, then he must let her be redeemed. All right. So the idea of concubine is not what we think it always is. Okay. We often think that concubine is just another sex partner for the master of the house, like a harem would be in other cultures. It's not exactly what the word concubine should conjure up in our minds. Okay, it means that she's been sold into servanthood, into the the service of the male in the household. Okay, now could that include sexual stuff? It does, because we've seen it. We see it later when they talk about so and so and their concubines. We know that they're having sexual relations with them. Part of the problem with David and Absalom was Absalom took one of David's concubines and made love with her on the roof for everybody to see and hear and all of that, and created a real problem. Okay, a real problem, an international problem. Okay, um, but it doesn't always mean that. Um, but here it says she's sold. He sells his daughter as a concubine. She's not to leave. The male slaves get to leave. She's like a slave, but she doesn't. If she is displeasing to her master who chose her for himself, then he must let her be redeemed, meaning that he goes back to the father and says, so the father can buy her back. Okay, beginning of the idea of a kinsman redeemer. You find yourself unwanted or even unjustly treated, and there's someone there to take you back. He has no right to sell her to foreigners because he has acted treacherously toward her, meaning the master. He can't just turn around and sell her like she's chattel. Okay, the relationship of daughter and father is to be honored, even though the father has sold her into this. Okay. Um, all right, here comes another one. Or if he chooses her for his son, he must deal with her according to the customary treatment of daughters, whatever that is. If he takes an additional wife, he must not reduce the food, clothing, or marital rights of the first wife. That's the son. Okay. And if he does not do these three things for her, she may leave free of charge without any payment. So if you wanted to be, it's interesting, if you wanted to be merciful to the one that you were displeased with, you could actually mistreat her to the point where she got to leave for nothing. Makes sense? But if you didn't, then you could do all you were supposed to do and basically demand a payment for her to be removed from your house. Yeah. So who's got all the power here? The man. The man's got all the power. That's the way at least saying, yeah, that's the way it ought to be. No. But that is how it is. But what also happens here is that there's commerce activity going on around these relationships being built. Okay, but they're not strictly property that you can buy and sell to anybody. So there's there's parental relationships that still hold value. Family still matters, even though it's not the kind of family life we generally think about. All right. Any comments about any of that? Surely you got something.
I mean,
These kind of laws were common in the day to certain extents, but what God allows for here is the reconstruction of family if the opportunity arises. Because it wasn't quite like that in other cultures. But God makes a way for these for when things go sideways, family can be there to to step in and make things right for the person. It's important.
Do you think part of that could have been, though, is that the master, if he pull up himself, or consider him God, thinking,
I think a lot of it has to
"Don't allow
do.
anything."
I think a lot of it has to do with justice. What is God's sense of justice in a situation? So a family is poor. All they have is a daughter to offer as a concubine. All right. So God says, I'm going to allow that, but I'm not going to allow it to destroy any opportunity she may have to be redeemed or treated justly if she's being treated unjustly. There's no reason for her to be turned out if she's being treated justly. But what it does say is if the man doesn't find favor with her, he can't just go sell her to some Egyptian or just sell her to anybody or kill her or anything like that. He's got to take the path that restores her to some degree, and that would be her family. So God is saying there's justice that has to be exercised here, even though she's a woman and doesn't hold the same stature, for lack of a better word, than the men that are involved in these transactions. So God sets forth laws that protect her. In a real sense, they do protect her.
And she's not left death.
Right, right. So when we get into the prophets during the time before the exile, when widows and orphans and everybody was being mistreated so horribly and being drugged to court and being stole from by judges, and I mean what this was trying to prevent had just been totally wiped out and gotten so out of control that God's whole reason, it's not, he basically says, you've offended me, but that's not why you're going to exile. You've offended me because you offended her. Yeah. And so you're going. He didn't mince any words about it. Really. So, uh, personal injury. No attorneys. So we got no personal injury attorneys. No Morris Bart or that other guy that drives me crazy that has Gordon that has the Bible verses all over the place. I want to can't go with that. Anyway, whoever strikes a person so that he dies must be put to death. So what's he talking about here? This is way beyond personal injury. This is killing somebody. Um, Now, the first 12, it leads us to believe he intended to strike to kill him. So basically, an eye for an eye. That's the way that we always hear that, and it's stated that way in Numbers of Deuteronomy. I forget which one. But if he did not intend any harm, and yet God allowed it to happen, okay, I will appoint a place for you where he may flee. So a place of refuge. So he strikes this guy, and man, he dies. He roundhouses him in the temple, and he falls over dead. He didn't mean to do it. So God says, I'm going to give you a place where you can go, and you'll be safe. If a person schemes and willfully acts against his neighbor to murder him, you must take him from my altar to be put to death. All right? So if you have premeditated murder, first degree murder is what this is talking about, or if you've been wrapped up in some kind of conspiracy to kill a person, then I want them removed from my presence, is what the altar part means. Outside the camp and kill him, put him to death. Whoever strikes his father or mother must be put to death. Okay, so here we have what? We have not only is life elevated, but the parental role to children is elevated to the point of having the same value as your own personal life. So the promise that God makes when it says honor your father and mother so you'll live long in the land. Okay, it's the only one that we have that has a promise attached to it, what God's going to do for you there. Well, this is another way of elevating the importance of family and family relations, and the mother and father as the heads of those families. Okay. It's interesting that they're a package deal. All right. Father and the mother. You can't strike either one of them. Whoever kidnaps a person must be put to death, whether he sells him or the person is found in his possession. So, taking away a person's freedom, that's what kidnapping would be. All right. That has the same penalty as taking their life. Okay. So, you don't steal a person like you would steal a chicken, you know. God has no patience for that. Uh, Whoever curses his father or mother will be put to death. So, boy, there's a lot of kids that are glad that doesn't hold true anymore.
We'd empty out the world.
Gee whiz, wouldn't we? Yeah. When men quarrel, so when you look at these, they're tying back to the Ten Commandments in a real sense. And really, all these laws tie back to the 10 in some sort of way. We won't map them all out, but you can kind of read through them and begin to figure out this. All these go back to the fifth commandment. Uh, Whoever curses his father or mother will be put to death. When men quarrel and one strikes the other with a stone or his fist, and the injured man does not die but is confined to a bed, if he can later get up and walk around outside leaning on his staff, then the one who struck him will be exempt for punishment. So if you wounded him just enough to where he walks with a limp, then you're not going to have any punishment. Meaning, if he can get along leaning on his staff, he's all right. You don't have to punish him. Now, if you have an argument with somebody, you can go to jail. We've broadened that one out pretty good. Nevertheless, he must pay for his lost work time and provide for his complete recovery. That sounds like a lawyer wrote that, right? Yeah. You're not going to be punished, but we're going to pick your pocket. So what's God saying here? You don't get away scot-free. Punishment so far has been to die for striking somebody or hurting somebody. So God's saying, I'm not going to punish you, but you're going to support that guy. You're going to make him whole, is a legal term that they like to use today. And that's basically what he's saying here.
So they can
Uh,
return to work.
just because he can lean on his staff doesn't mean that he can provide for his family. So you're going to do that. So now you hurt somebody, not only you're providing for one, you're providing for two.
Gotta pay that pain and suffering.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly what it is. Yeah.
And even the kids, I mean, all they had to do was hurt that their parents
No.
might die.
Yeah. A lot of silence in the home.
Man.
But you think about this now, without these laws, you got 2 million people living in the desert. What would their world have been like if the God in the cloud had not been speaking these words to the fearless Moses to share with them? It would have been everything on, man. You know, it doesn't take anything for these people to just slip out of their role as dependent children upon their father and start losing their minds. And we're the same way. You know, we gotta have rails. But the beautiful part about a Christian faith is Jesus says, I'm the rails. And the life I'm giving you is full and free. So really, you got boundless boundaries with him. Whereas here, you really had to watch what you were doing. Because you didn't want it, all of this is sin. And you didn't want it to result in sin before God. And you certainly didn't want the penalty that came along with it. Because a lot of it's death. All right. When a man strikes his male or female slave with a rod and the slave dies under his abuse, the owner must be punished. Kind of leaves it open to the punishment. I think it's enumerated later. It says there, he must suffer vengeance. However, if the slave can stand up after a day or two, the owner should not be punished because he is his owner's property. So the slave is definitely property. It says so right there. If he strikes in and if he's able to get up in a day or two, that means he can get back to work and everything's good. But if he can't, if the slave, his property, has been damaged to the point where he can't live a life, then the slave owner is going to be punished. As I said, it doesn't say what that is, but the sense here is justice. If you can get up in a day or two, you're fine. Go on about and do what you said that you would do because you sold yourself into slavery. All right? But if you can't, then the one who caused the pain and suffering needs to be punished for it. But here it particularly doesn't enumerate what that would be. When men get in a fight and hit a pregnant woman so that her children are born prematurely, but there is no injury, the one who hit her must be fined as the woman's husband demands from him, and he must pay according to judicial assessment. So this must have been a common thing. Can you believe? So there's two men fighting, and the pregnant wife goes out to try to break it up, and she gets hit and miscarries a child. Okay, so the man that hit her, he's responsible. He's got to pay according to the judicial assessment. If there's an injury, then you must give life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, bruise for bruise, wound for wound. Um, Pretty tough. It's thrown in here in the same context of the woman. So there's some discussion about verse 24. Let's see if wait a minute. Verse 24. Let me just scroll here. Um, so I'm trying to see what he says here about all of that because I didn't read it today. Sorry about that. Um, punishment must match but not exceed the damage done. So that's why it lays out this in verse 23 and 24. Um, so the purpose of stating it this way is that someone could not go overboard in the punishment. Um, you stubbed my you crushed my thumb with a hammer. I'm gonna cut off your right foot. So that was not allowed. You couldn't just let the law be used as a tool to punish excessively. So we see that a lot in politics today, right? It's kind of like that thing that's going on with Trump and that New York district attorney. He's wanting to take a misdemeanor and somehow or another turn it into a federal felony. Yeah, and so he's using the law in a way that goes way beyond the intent of what the law is to do. It's to establish justice, and when it's used to create an injustice, then God says that's wrong. And so he states that here. If you've lost an eye, take an eye, but don't take a hand. That kind of thing. Um, so we sometimes want the law to work more punitively than it is. And I'm thinking of right now, I'm thinking of domestic cases in Livingston Parish because there's a guy out there today. He had a yelling match with his wife in the front yard, and the neighbors called and they hauled him off. So he'll probably be there for 30 days or more just trying to get his first hearing because the courts are so full. So in the meantime, He may come out of that and not have any charges, but he'll miss a truck payment or two. He'll miss his rent or two. And all of this will happen to him. And what will happen is that because the law is so broad about you just having an argument, he'll wind up losing a whole lot more than just his freedom for a few days. It is sad, and it happens all the time. Um, but it's a sadness that we bring upon ourselves because the courts are so it is overwhelmed, man. You go out there and look at a docket one day and think that goes on every day here, hundreds. You just can't get through all of them, and that's even holding court in jail, video court. Can't get through them all. So that's just an example. The law was never meant to work that way, but sometimes it works that way. It's not designed to work that way, but it does. That still means we should do something about it. We don't just ignore it because that's the way it is. And then at the same time, we don't punish people unjustly, so that you jaywalk and you get 3 years prison, something stupid like that.
With that whole, all of that, if somebody ended up hurting someone else's child, would they then retaliate on that person's child?
In here,
Mm-hmm.
that's a good question. I don't know if I've ever seen that when it involves children.
Would- and here, wouldn't that be considered more of injury to property than it would injury to child?
It depends on the mother of the child. So that's going to be something I'm going to look up now. I hadn't thought about that. Do you bring the sin of basically the sin of adult upon the sin of a child? I would say God says no, but I'm gonna look and see. Yeah, that's a good question. Never thought about it. Um, and we may yet find it in here. When a man strikes the eye of his male or female slave and destroys it, he must let the slave go free in compensation for the eye. So if he strikes you and you lose your eye, you're free. If he knocks out the tooth of his male or female slave, he must let the slave go free in compensation for the tooth. Hmm. When an ox gores a man or a woman to death, the ox must be stoned, and its meat may not be eaten, but the ox owner is innocent. So I guess if you're just walking through a field, taking a shortcut, and somebody's ox gets you, they kill the ox. To me, it sounds a little out of tune, but I guess the man really does play. He's not punished. He does pay. He's not punished, but he loses the ox, and the
I
ox
mean, for
loses
them,
his life.
that would be pretty valuable.
Yeah. It says here, however, if the ox is in the habit of goring, and its owner has been warned yet does not restrain it, and it kills a man or woman, the ox must be stoned, and the owner must also be put to death. So evidently, you didn't stone after the first time. You didn't kill the ox after the first time it gored, or else it wouldn't have the chance to be how does it say this? However, a habit of goring other people. So if you let your ox continue to hurt people, then ox died, and so did you. Um, if instead a ransom is demanded of him, he can pay a redemption price for his life in the full amount demanded from him. So I guess if the family of the person that dies as a result of being gored, instead of the man being put to death, they could say, no, we'll take $1,000 and he can live. Something like that. Um, if it gores a son or a daughter, he is to be dealt with according to the same law as above. If the ox gores a male or female slave, he must give 30 shekels of silver to the slave's master, and the ox must be stoned. So, all the way through that, the owner of the ox really is penalized at every step And the penalty gets worse the longer the ox is allowed to act out, unless someone wants to redeem his life. Now you got to be thinking. These are some crazy ideas. I mean, this is some. We're concerned about oxes and pigs and slaves and wives, all these various things. And when God is speaking these things to Moses, uh, there's a high level of specificity here. These are particular things that are a problem that God has taken notice of, okay, and is trying to correct in some sort of way, in specific manner. But what did Moses say when they were afraid for God to speak to him? He says, "Don't be afraid. God is testing you." So here we find this is more than just laws. There's still the testing going on behind this. Okay, so how willing are these people? How willing are they to follow these laws? Because they're for their own protection, and they are establishing a sense of justice amongst them, so that they can live, at peace and have justice. Are they going to do it? And so it's all being laid out there for them. It is a matter of testing. When a man uncovers a pit or digs a pit and does not cover it, and an ox or donkey falls into it, the owner of the pit must give compensation. He must pay it to its owner, but the dead animal will become his. So he digs a pit, and donkey falls in it and dies or whatever. He pays the man, and he gets the dead donkey. I guess you eat donkey. I don't know what you do with a dead donkey. You just got to deal with it, dispose of it. Yeah, yeah.
Probably make a good indoor.
I don't know. Yeah, we wouldn't have to worry about a mess for a few days. Um, and it's interesting too that this idea of digging pits, there's a lot of that goes on, and you kind of have to wonder what that's about. Is it a refuse hole? I mean, is it for garbage? Is it, just what is all that about? We'll come across it again, I think. When a man's ox injures his neighbor's ox and it dies, then they must sell the live ox and divide its proceeds. They must also divide the dead animal. If, however, it is known that the ox was in the habit of goring, yet his owner has not restrained it, he must compensate fully, ox for ox. The dead animal will become his. So, one ox kills another ox, and he's in the habit of killing oxes or goring others. The man with the live ox gives away the ox to the guy that had got the dead. They trade. He gets the dead ox, you get the live ox, the one that gores.
You get the serial killer on
Yeah, which I think I'd be killing the goring ox before somebody wanted my life for it. So, yeah. Okay. To me, it's amazing. So that all of this comes up like this. When we go back and look at the Ten Commandments, all of this ties back, this idea of protecting and respecting your neighbor's property. And that's stated in the Ten Commandments, right? You're not supposed to covet it. You're not supposed to do these different things. So all of this really broadens out the Ten Commandments in various ways. And we continue for a little bit. It says, when a man steals an ox or a sheep and butchers it or sells it, he must repay 5 cattle for the ox, or 4 sheep for the sheep. If a thief is caught in the act of breaking in and he is beaten to death, no one is guilty of bloodshed. So stand your ground law. But if this happens after sunrise, the householder is guilty of bloodshed. So what's the difference? Some guy breaks into your home at night and you beat him to death.
you're
You
asleep.
can't see him.
Yeah.
You don't know who it is.
Dark, you're asleep.
But the sun's up, You shouldn't be as fearful. Get out of my house. You can tell them what to do. That's all I can figure. A thief must make full restitution. If he is unable, he is to be sold because of his theft. If what was stolen, whether ox, donkey, or sheep, is actually found alive in his possession, he must repay double. So you don't get off just for returning what you stole. You still got to pay a penalty. And why? Because you messed with another person's stuff. Okay. You don't mess with their wife. You don't mess with their things. Everybody will live in peace, and everything will be dealt with justly as a result. Yeah. Yeah. Well, God doesn't hold it as retribution of more than it is. It's justice. Yeah. So retribution can sometimes not be just. It can go overboard.
True. So this is more just about
Yeah.
punishment,
Yeah.
doing what you
Yeah. That's right. And the penalty's pretty much okay. If I steal an ox and I have an ox, I just lost both of them. Yeah. Um, that would teach you not to steal. You would think. When a man lets a field or vineyard be grazed in and then allows for his animals to go and graze in someone else's field, he must repay with the best of his own field or vineyard. So if he lets a field be grazed in, but then allows his animals to go graze somewhere else, that's a no-no.
But also to give up part of his vineyard.
Yeah.
That was.
Yeah. Well, that's
what
his
they drank.
livelihood.
Yeah, that's what they drank, and livelihood.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
That was-
so what would this stop? The guy saying, "Oh man, my field's really crappy. I'm gonna let his animals come feed in mine. I'm gonna take mine and let mine feed in his because his looks really good." Okay, so it's a way of stealing. So that's the answer to the problem. Yeah, yeah, that's right. So now it's just going to cost you what you are trying to save. Yeah, that was the money. Yeah, yep. Um, when a fire gets out of control, spreads to thorn bushes and consumes stacks of cut grain, standing grain, or a field, the one who started the fire must make full restitution for what he burned. So those laws still stand today. Um, you run a fire through a stand of timber and see what it don't cost you. It costs you the value of every one of the trees. Yeah. Who did? Really? I didn't know that. Ooh. Yeah.
Of course, in losing parish, more than timber that somebody's hungry.
Well, that's usually why they got burned.
Everything's
They were
close,
burning
you
it
know.
for hunting.
Yeah, I'm just saying from this.
I never knew that.
Most everything.
He was?
That's before anything was gave.
Yeah. Yeah. Open rain. All right. We're going to go a little bit more. In fact, no, we're not. We're going to stop at verse 7. And it goes on like this for a while. And some of this we do need to look at because, well, the rest of it goes through chapter 23. So we don't have much left. We'll look over the rest of it and then we get into a little more narrative about what's happening in the life of everybody. You like going through this? Yeah, you don't ever do it, really. It's not the kind of devotional reading that you're looking for usually. But it's fascinating to me what was important. Uh, it gives you a description of life, but then it's important to God how his people are going to live because he's already stated, you are mine possession and you're a nation of priests to others. So what he's teaching them about the way to live together ultimately is going to be a life that they show to other nations. and they reveal that in the reality of who their God is, because everything about everybody's life on the planet at the time was, this is what our gods say, or this is how we appease our gods, or whatever. And what God is showing them is a better way.
Treat your neighbor.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And just the Hammurabi Law Code was good, but it wasn't the end all of everything that was wrong in the world. And God, well, the Hebrew people come along with really truly a better way. Um, but they're unable to gain the respect of anyone around them because of their mistake with the golden calf. They destroyed everything. That's why God said, "You people are not going to be the ones I take into this land where I intend to launch my. This is where I'm launching my program to save the world, and there's no way you're doing it." And so we think about that. Boy, it's pretty harsh. Really not. It really was not.
You
And
feel bad for Moses. He brought it on himself. I do feel bad
well,
for Moses.
I think Moses. Uh, well, Moses is that other example of following the will of God does not guarantee ease. I mean, Moses was the wisest guy, the most humble guy, and yet his life was not easy. The day that he met God at the burning bush, everything changed for Moses, and it didn't necessarily get to be better in the sense of calmer, happier, all of those things. And Moses was that man, and really the uh, the um, the growth of Moses all the way through. When you start, you, you set up a timeline from the time he meets God, or really before when he murders, and you take it all the way through till he's told, "No, you can't go," and you see the maturity and changes in Moses and the way that he does things, and the humility that he has before God and his responsibilities, and it's really a remarkable picture of a
And there's
person.
a pretty temperament,
Yeah, yeah.
and
Well, we
it's
all
true.
are when we're young.
Yeah, but I mean, if you walk with God, see all the times He saved him, the miracles that He performed. Amazing miracles. Not just somebody came back to life, but split the ocean,
Well, yeah,
everything. Yeah,
and we find the really the zenith of his humility that we find in Moses is when God calls him back up the mountain after the whole golden calf thing, and he says, "I'm wiping these people out. I want to start over with your seed." And Moses says, "No way. No, no. You know why he does it? He says, you'll be a laughing stock." Okay, so Moses, God knows. I mean, but Moses approaches his relationship with God as one who genuinely cares about the reputation of God. Now, what if everybody that had a faith and trust in God, a fear of God, like is described here, had a genuine concern for the reputation of God in the world? See, God accepts that. He doesn't call Moses down for opposing. He doesn't. He accepts it for what it is, because God and Moses are in this moment where God is seen. He already knew it, but he's allowing Moses to experience it. This guy really has bought into who I am as his God, and I'm not a bully. I'm not any of the things that he sees in these gods around him. I'm a God that carries him on in my hands. And Moses is bought into that whole thing, and he understands my love for my people, even though I'm frustrated with them and could wipe them out right now. He's got the full picture of what I'm doing in the world. Now, we all have that opportunity to hold the reputation of God in our hands and to have a full understanding and an expression of what God's doing in the world, because we follow Jesus. And yet we don't do that. We don't do that well. None of us do it as well as we do. But that's the lesson that we learn from Moses, that in that moment where God is ready to raise him up above all others, Moses is saying, "Wait a minute. Don't do that to me because it's going to hurt you. I want you to be great. I want you to be great." And so when he's able to say that, it's like the next thing that what does Moses want next? All I want to see is your glory. And God says, "You can't see it, but I'll show you my back." And so he does. He passes by and it says, "The glory of the Lord shone, but not the full glory." And Moses has to come down with a veil on his face because
Yeah.
it's so bright.
Somebody else, you could.
Yeah. Yeah.
Nobody could.
Yeah.
Especially.
When I read that whole episode, I see this wonderful relationship of respect and awe and devotion from God and from Moses. And you begin to think, boy, if Abraham was called a friend of God, what do you call Moses? Because in my mind, in my mind, Moses is greater than Abraham in the sense of his relationship with God.
Or even like with David, said,
Yeah.
man after my own heart.
Yeah. Yeah, but when God decides to send some folks to cheer Jesus on, he sends Moses and Elijah, the lawgiver and the great prophet, to let him know. And right after that, Luke tells us that Jesus set his face toward Jerusalem.
And I share that with people because at times when I witness people, they'll say, well, why? Well, if there's a loving God and all this, why does he let all these things happen? And I tell them all the time, just like with Moses, he didn't want to control Moses. He could make Moses do anything he wanted. He could make